In the lower west overlook, there's a square of 5 tenements. One hugs the wall, that is the bridge garden. 2 flank at its sides, stretching outward, and the last 2 flank at their sides. That results in a sort of square wall, enclosing a courtyard with an entryway into this yard narrow enough to hang a clothesline from one rooftop to another. In this courtyard, the tenants fence out sections and keep gardens or livestock pens. A dirt path runs straight into the center, leading to a single-story bungalow. That bungalow is the Hole. The buildings were all made of wood and scrap. The tenants did not lack for resourcefulness. After all, they needed it here in the lower west. The city's officials made it clear that no one was to disturb the city's original architecture without their permission. That permission tended to have an unspoken price, placed just high enough for only the wealthy to reach. I digress. Hole was a den, run by a band of screamers. They claimed to be in exile, boasting that they had attempted to slay the Dragon Magnanimous, that ruthless overlord of the Screams, and that even now their lives were in danger. But truth be told, I believe they simply left their icy home for a warmer weather, and you could not do better for the weather than by the sea. Their tall tale could hardly be blamed. Bands needed to establish a tough reputation here in the lower west. Not that this bunch really needed to rely on it. Each member of the band stood over 6 feet tall, 3 feet wide, and 2 feet thick. There were children in the tenements smaller than their arms alone. Combined with their fair features, layered over the kind of uneven tans and sunburns you'd expect on plump holidays. They were an odd sight indeed. It goes without saying that they took protection from the tenants at the square. The tenants were often too poor to make hard cash exchanges worth their time, so they made them grow certain crops and livestock. It should, however, be said that they actually provided protection for more than just themselves. Other bands learned quick and hard to leave this square alone, and that suited the tenants just fine. It was certainly better to pay one band an exorbitant sum for real protection than to be shaken down by a half-dozen bands each month. This band had no name, but the locals started to calling them Varl's Boys, after who seemed to be their leader. It was a misnomer, however, since the band had no real leader in particular. But Varl, while not the biggest and certainly not the brightest among them, often filled the role when it was needed. He was a fat sod with doughy flesh and a plump red nose. Like most of his band, he was brown blonde of hair and blue of eye. His voice was like a loud, sustained belch, and it was rare to see him stand, and if he did, he was to waddle to the keg, the chamber pot, or his mattress. Speaking of kegs, the ferment was the main draw of the Hole. They called it firewater. It was an apt name. The liquid wasn't the usual clear-colored swill that hit the streets of the lower west, but it was amber of color. It tasted vaguely of honey. The aftertaste burned and stung, so I avoided the stuff. The patrons of the Hole loved it. Those paunchy, balding clerks and their weary workshoppers all came to imbibe the stuff by the pint. They acted like animals whilst under its influence, shouting and spewing throughout the night, reveling in its toxic effects. Revel in that, and the girls. In most places, even the lower west, girls would be expected to bathe and shave with some regularity, apply perfumes and lotions, use makeup to cover blemishes, and particularly pockmarks. But above all, possess a modicum of natural looks. But Varl's boys made no such demands. They let the local girls and women of the tenants sell their bodies in the Hole, and they set no rules, other than the prospective clients pay them instead of the girl. If she was a tenant, her family's protection would be lowered. Otherwise, they would give her a healthy portion of whatever they were paid. In this, they were generally honest. I'd never seen an arrangement so lax as this before. And my first thought toward it, poisoned by the streets of my youthful mind, was the band were properly taking advantage of the girls' inability to count. It took time to realize that they could know this and just simply not care. I digress again. The girls were usually married, oftentimes not even girls, but middle-aged mothers with a half-dozen brats roaming the streets. They spent their mornings doing domestic chores. then went to the hole at night. They wore the same clothes they wore in the day, unflattering dresses or simple linen shirts with work pants, almost always tattered and stained. They came with sweaty brows, pockmarked skin, calluses on their hands, and lines on their faces exaggerated by heavy work. To myself and those of my ilk, at the hole, it was more pleasant to look at the fire than at them. But I suppose it says something about the hole's patrons that they would pay for the services from some of these ghastly women. There was but one exception. She gave her name as Desiree, a disappointingly unimaginative name for a whore. She was a split, with the soft brown skin and the tar-black hair of their kind. She was young and made frequent use of the bathhouses and their grooming, where she no doubt plied her trade as well. As girls in the Lower West went, she was a gem in the rough, not just due to her looks either. For what she lacked in apparent sense and intelligence, she made up for with a voice more beautiful than she. When she sang, everyone around dropped their conversations and listened. It was as if the air itself stood still. There would be no sound but the crackle of the flame, and her exotic voice dancing along the river of sound. The band taught her songs from their land. Most of them were short, bawdy tunes not suited for her high-pitched voice and accented tone. But there were several slow, mournful pieces that stirred the heart in me I had long taken for dead. I knew little else of Desiree, which even I found odd, given my trade. And that's the last thing of note about the whole. Me. And those like me. I've never heard a satisfying name for what I do. Assassins assassinate. Sabotagers sabotage. Spies spy. But what name is there for someone who does all of those things and more? I've heard the term agent used, but the word conjures to mind images of tedious clerks or lawyers poring over parchments with bespectacled eyes droning on and on and on. It feels wrong. But it is better than others I've heard. Bagman, errand boy, tasker. Perhaps these names are suitably vague for my employer's sake, but it does little for my own hungry ego. Whatever I am, I and those like me find it convenient to meet clients in the hole. Given all I've said about it, I believe it would be redundant to say why. The word need only be given out that I am a man willing to do very bad things in exchange for bullies. And a hard-faced, cantankerous old bastard will show up in the hole asking for me by name. And you know, I can't say I've ever gone long without work.